Good afternoon. My name is Sarah, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Central Region Drought Outlook conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. John Ives with the National Weather Service in Kansas City, you may begin your conference.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone to today's call. We would like to let everyone know that we will have the call today, and we'll have one again next month, and that will be covered just shortly. The files for today will be available, including the recording, the PowerPoint, and a PDF following this call. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker and briefer for today, Dr. Dennis Toddy. He's the South Dakota State climatologist at the South Dakota State University. Dennis, it's all yours.
Thank you, John, for introducing us as the South Dakota State University. We can be like the Ohio State University now. Thank you. Good to be here with everyone today. Although we're taking this show on the road this time, I'd like to issue special thanks to the Bismarck Weather Service Forecast Office for the use of their facilities today. We're up here for a meeting, and so we decided they offered us their location, so we're coming to you from Bismarck this time. We are doing our, as John indicated, we're going to kind of a monthly schedule now with the ongoing drought issues, but because of the relative slower pace of change at this point, we're going to go to monthlies. The next one will be coming up next month on the 18th of October. Thank you, Doug. At 1 p.m. And our presenter that time will be Dr. Stuart Foster, the Kentucky State Climatologist, and also American Association of State Climatologists President. So, good guy. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide there, John. This is, again, a combination of a number of different climate services partnerships between NOAA, the National Weather Service, state climatologists, regional climate centers, and USDA contributing different pieces and different parts of this. Also, we've taken a little bit of information from USGS this time in one of our images. So the Outlook, a copy of the slides along with notes, and also this recording will be available at the 2 websites listed there, at the Midwest Regional Climate Center at the University of Illinois and at the High Plains Regional Climate Center at the University of Nebraska. Unfortunately, because of the structure here, again, we'll have to wait until the end to do questions, so please do note them, and we'll deal with questions at the end. And I think that is the main. Please move on to the next slide there, John. Our agenda for this time is, again, kind of our current situation and put some historical context again, some of the current impacts, predictions, and some, and then we'll have time for questions and comments at the end. The slide here was taken by Jim Angel, supplied by Jim Angel anyway, DeWitt County, Illinois, showing some of the corn, an example of the corn that is across the Midwest that we're seeing. There is yield on corn in some of these locations. Surprisingly, for as bad as conditions were, obviously a lot less than most other times. In some cases, I've heard corn yields have been small, but people are still harvesting them because of the high price of corn. There is still a decent amount of money out in fields that people are trying to take off. The other part of it is you still have to remove the stock from the field in some way, so harvesting it is another round of doing that. Okay, please move on to the next slide, John. As we're looking across the region, kind of a summary of what's going on, we're kind of seeing it's sort of a tale of 2 areas. In the eastern and southeastern part of the region, we are seeing some improvement due to some rainfalls and some remnants of Hurricane Isaac. They have seen some improvement in that area. I don't think anyone down there would say things are great, but they're headed the right direction. And as you look in the western and northern areas, conditions have not improved, and as we were discussing up here, have actually worsened somewhat with dryness later here in the season. Mentioned Isaac, and some rain has helped in those eastern areas, and we'll talk about some of the precipitation amounts that are occurring or not occurring as we're looking ahead here. Some from prediction standpoint, in the near term, not much in the way of changes in the pattern. Looks like we are kind of locked into the situation right now that we're in with no major pattern changes. We do seem to be on track still for occurrence of El Nino, but as the Climate Prediction Center has pointed out, this is likely going to be a weaker El Nino and a lesser issue on an impact. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And we'll talk about the drought outlook, as the drought conditions are likely to persist over a good portion of the region simply because of the status of the situation going on right now. Okay, next slide, please. Since we're still not too far removed and still dealing with the issues from this summer, this is June through August, I put up the statewide ranks for temperature and precipitation. Temperature on the left-hand side, out of 118 years of data, you can see that much of the western to central U.S. was very high on that ranking scale. Most states, at least in the top 10, if not top 5 in our region. We do have 2 states, Colorado and Wyoming, that were the warmest on record for June through August. Several other states were close, but when you look at some of the Dust Bowl years, especially like 1934 and 36, we still are somewhat behind those. On the right-hand side is the June through August statewide precipitation ranks. Again, Wyoming joined set the high level mark there as being driest on record, along with Nebraska. South Dakota 4th, Iowa 2nd, Missouri all as 3rd. You know, top 10 rankings there in that same category of areas. The numbers do indicate the actual ranking. The relative ranking is given by the scale across the bottom. And you can see much of the southeast, anyway, that was in part of the drought last year, had a relatively good and relatively wet year comparatively. And portions of just to our south, like Oklahoma, maybe not quite as bad as last year, but certainly, you know, they are running into a second-year issue along with this. Okay, next slide, please. Looking at the last 30 days now. This previously was June through August. Now we're looking at the last 30 days. Showing across the northern plains and Corn Belt here, again showing that tale of 2 differences. Looking at where you are, looking at the lower part of the image is Missouri, and then Illinois over to Indiana. You can kind of see the dark lines there. This is total precipitation running from 6 to 8 or 9 inches in some places over the last 30 days, as they have had some storms come through there, and again, the remnants of Hurricane Isaac that moved through there very slowly did provide some relief for them in this area. We'll talk about that more as we go along with some of the impacts. On the upper left-hand side, as we get up in the Dakotas, western Nebraska, and Minnesota, over that same time period, you see much less, an inch or less precipitation, which has, you know, added to some of the issues that we are seeing going on right now. Next slide. For comparison, we're going to look at the percent of normal or percent of average precipitation to put that into context. And yes, there is an odd dot there in North Dakota that we're questioning what that is right now, but one thunderstorm, one individual thunderstorm. So this shows also, you know, how much rainfall that has done for the southeastern part of the region and the benefits that we have seen with that, and we'll show you some of the soil moisture recovery because of that. Whereas up in the Dakotas, we're on the order of, you know, most of that area is less than 50% of average. A large part of it is less than 25%. You'll even see some of the places up in Montana to northwestern South Dakota that are less than 5% of average. Certain of those areas have not had any precipitation. There are a few stations in South Dakota that have not had any precipitation over the last 30 days. That would put them at driest on record, obviously, during that time period. And that is leading to some of the drought issues, continuation or expansion of drought issues as we're going along. That is not as, you know, fall conditions are not as much of an impact on an overall drought situation, but it does leave you at some risk if you cannot get soil moisture recovery for the next year. Next slide, please. Now we'll look also at the departure from average temperature, departure from normal, departure from average temperatures. Again, a dot plot. The area in the south to southeast, you see some green there. The area that has been wetter has also been running near average to slightly cooler than average. Those two often go together in this situation. And then as you get further north and west, you see warmer than average conditions across the Dakotas and Minnesota on the order of 4 to 6 degrees above average during this time period. There was a period in early August where we did have some cooler temperatures, kind of a harbinger of a little bit of a pattern change. Since then, we've been running relatively warm compared to average. And now we're getting a little bit of a pattern shift again also with some northwest flow. But this has also led to some 100-degree temperatures out in the plains, 110-degree temperatures in late August, which is a bit uncommon. Or at least the 110-degree ones are a bit uncommon for this time of year. Some stray hundreds are still a possibility. A large part of this has been due to a lack of live vegetation, very dry surface conditions, is allowing temperatures to heat up relatively quickly. Okay, next slide, please. Just for a comparison on the fall precipitation of what we would expect, as we're talking about soil moisture recovery, what we could expect during an average fall. This is from the High Plains Regional Climate Center, showing, in the southern parts of the area, as much as 11 inches is average during the period of September through November. And also, as you get further out in the plains, you're looking at 3 to 5. In Montana, is even less than 3 inches over that time period. So not as much of a chance for recovery based on average conditions. But unfortunately, we don't look right now like we're going to get near average conditions in the fall based on what has happened so far. We still have a little bit of time to recover, but climatology is working against us right now. As we head further into the fall, we have lesser chances for widespread precipitation. Next slide, please. Referred earlier to the soil moisture conditions and soil moisture recovery, showing you here data from the NLDAS project as part of NOAA. The upper right-hand side is the deviation from average soil moisture conditions. This is modeled soil moisture. And the scale at the bottom is in millimeters, so you divide by 25. So the orangish area is 4 to 6 inches below average soil moisture in Iowa, Wisconsin, Northern Illinois, those places where they have not seen the precipitation. But you look further south there and you see some white areas and even a little bit of blue in southern Illinois, where the model's indicating the heavier precipitation has helped recover soil moisture conditions in that area. So we are seeing some improvement because of that. I'm sure local reports would be a better indicator on what's happening there, what the soil is looking like, but certainly we've headed down the right direction there. On the left-hand side is the soil moisture percentile, basically a scale giving you from a 0 to 100 on what conditions would be like. Normally soils are fairly dry this time of year anyway, but it's always good to get a little bit more of a detail on where we would be on a historical ranking scale. Again, you see that southeastern area where they have recovered. They're near the middle of the distribution, the 30th to 70th percentile. As you get into Iowa, Illinois, we're getting down into the, about the 5th percentile, and then as you get into Nebraska and some of the other pockets there, below the 2nd percentile. So extremely dry soil conditions in this area, ones that are greatly in need of recovery this fall, but so far have not seen much recovery. Next slide, please. One other issue that we've not talked much about in these webinars has been water issues. And that is because part of the year we were still following some very, very wet last few years. So some of the longer-term moisture conditions were masking some of the issues, at least in some of the stream flows and in some of wells and aquifers and that sort of thing. So the slide I have here is from the USGS. It's a hydrologic scale on drought conditions. So the tan or brown areas are considered below normal stream flows on the 10th to 24th percentile. You see some ones that are in Nebraska, Iowa, and Wisconsin that are the darker brown that are less than the 5th percentile. These are stream flows, and they're compared to this time of year. It's a little bit hard to get very low stream flows because we typically have lower stream flows this time of year anyway. So when you compare it, it doesn't show up quite as well. That's why we don't see as much of that over the northern areas. But we are seeing, fairly low stream flows, obviously. Other water issues that have been ongoing is those people who use surface water for cattle. Water has been very limited, or in some cases there has been water, but it has been very poor quality. There have been cattle losses from cattle drinking water that is of poor quality. There have been issues along the Mississippi River because of lower flows, have limited barge traffic, in some cases held it off while they've been dredging, and in other cases not been able to load barges to the same level to try to keep them lighter, getting through the shallower areas of the Mississippi River. Also, heard reports of wells running dry in some various locations through the middle part of the summer. These are some of the shallower aquifers that wet up and dry out more quickly. I've heard also some aquifers running fairly low in South Dakota too, as we reach near the end of the growing season. Next slide, please. One more issue indicating of things that are as an impact of the overall summer conditions. Obviously, we've talked about some major crop losses throughout the region. So a lot of, in many of those cases, if they've taken it for silage, it's taken off already, or the crop was dried out because it was dead, and they've harvested. But also because of the very warm conditions, you have corn that is maturing very quickly. So what we're showing here is data from the last, since 1995, the percent of U.S. corn, or percent harvested, and dates run across the bottom. So it's a cumulative scale. You can see, a mixed bag of years. On the far right-hand side was the 2003 data from, or 2009. Thank you. Looking at my colors. 2009, very cool. No, not as much a cool year. It was a very wet fall. It was a wet fall delayed. It was somewhat of a cool summer, but then wet fall delayed harvest conditions across the region. You see on the far left-hand side 2012, where we are, this is reported from mid-September. We're a little over 25% of the corn harvested already, which is well ahead of the average pace. I've heard reports in South Dakota, people thinking they will be completely out of the fields by the end of the month because of the early work that has been done and crops that are ready to harvest. In fact, some cases we're getting reports of ears dropping early, so they're trying to get out quickly, even though they may not have dried down to the moisture level they want. They're trying to get it before they lose the yield completely with the ears dropping off. So, moving on to the next slide, please. One other impact, pasture and rangeland, which we've talked about several times. This is again from USDA NASS. Percent of rangeland which is in the poor or very poor category on the weekly report. You see the epicenter of this with Nebraska, 97% poor to very poor, but a larger number of states that are on the order of better than 50%, better than 70%, which has again led to that issue with people trying to find hay and grass for livestock, any kind of livestock to eat without paying an arm and a leg for it. We also saw the impact of several of us heading to the meeting in Bismarck as we were moving, as we were driving up along here, seeing a large number of trucks headed south, taking hay along, probably out of North Dakota and probably some out of Canada, coming down, being transported southward for the area that was not impacted by the drought nearly as much this summer. Next slide, please. And an update from today on large fire incidents. From USDA, also USDA Forest Service. The dots in the circle there are part of what we consider our central region of NOAA, where there are fires that are ongoing, or at least were active as of this morning. Most of them were relatively small out in the plains areas. As you go further northwest, there are some larger scale fires further out. This is going to continue to be an issue and has a large number of fire officials very concerned because of the very dry crop conditions, regular, very low dew points with Canadian air we keep getting regularly. We were getting dew points in South Dakota of relative humidities of 40 to 50% early in the morning. So there's a lot of fire concern out there, and especially with hunting seasons beginning, the potential for inadvertent fires, even people not doing anything stupid, just fires being started because of that. Okay, next slide. We wrap this all up into the U.S. Drought Monitor, the update that was released this morning. You still see very widespread conditions from the southwestern U.S. all the way up towards the Great Lakes and pockets even in the southeast, ongoing carryover from last year. Lots of D3, D4 all throughout our region. Currently, 65% of the continental U.S. is in D1 or worse. This is a reduction in size from earlier this year, but we obviously have very large-scale conditions still going on. Again, the tan here is D1, yellow areas are D0, all the way up to the D4 category. Let's go to the next slide. The U.S. Drought Monitor. This is the central region view where we've zoomed up over the states in the middle part of the country. Again, you know the widespread drought conditions ongoing, lots of D4 over this area. Over 12% of this area is in D4, and over a third of the area is in combined D3 and D4. So a great deal of our area is still in very serious condition. Only 3% of the area is not covered by anything on the drought map, a little bit down in Kentucky. Those areas along the north, which had stayed out of the drought monitor this year, has gradually been covered some because of the dry out that we have going on, especially in the Dakotas, northern South Dakota, and parts of Minnesota. Yes, it pointed out to me that D0 is not considered drought, but it is indicating dryness in that area. Okay, next slide. Get to our outlook section here. Again, we'll look at the 2-week outlook. We'll also be looking at, let's go ahead and just go on to the next slide here. Wanted to point out, and this is maybe not going to render very well for everyone, this is supposed to be a loop of sea surface temperature anomalies, differences from sea surface temperature along the equatorial Pacific. On the lower left-hand side is Australia. On the right-hand side is South America. And the scale is showing difference from average or the sea surface temperature anomaly. It's in degrees C. So multiply by 1.8 or about 2 to get degrees Fahrenheit. So if this were going, it may render different on each computer. If it were looping correctly, you would see some conditions in the middle of the summer where we had looking like El Nino was going to be impinging on us very quickly. As we move on to more recent sea surface temperature maps, that area of warmth is still there, not quite the strength and size of what it was. What that is indicating for us is that the El Nino is probably going to come and be a part of this fall and winter, but it was never expected to be a very strong one, but it's even indicating now it could be just a marginal El Nino on the order of week, depending on how this all plays out. So what it's still, we're still going to see things in the outlooks that are reflective of El Nino conditions because there will be some impact, but certainly the overall impact of El Nino is going to be relatively weak on us as we go ahead. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide. This is the 8 to 14-day outlook for the 27th of September until the 3rd of October. This will be being updated within the hour for a new version, but we're still seeing a similar pattern of what we've had over the last few weeks with, you see, warmer than average conditions across the west. We've had a ridge that kind of was over the middle part of the U.S., has retrograded or moved west, and has been parked over the western U.S. Heated up conditions over there, dried them out, led to the fire issues they're seeing right now. To the east of that ridge, there's been a trough that's developed over the eastern U.S., has allowed some cooler air in down out of Canada, also brought drier conditions. Canadian air is not very warm or not very humid, obviously coming off the continent, so cooler conditions are expected over the next couple-week period overall in the eastern U.S. Associated with that on the right-hand side is the probabilities for precipitation. The brown area indicating increased chances for below average precipitation. As long as we stay in this Canadian flow, it's going to be very limited chances across most of the region for precipitation. Probably will have small chances here and there as showers move by, but nothing major in the way of precipitation. Areas of the far southwest, the northeast and Florida are looking at some improved chances for precipitation, but in the main part of the drought areas, maybe not as much chance for improvement. The impact that's going to have is a more immediate impact. It's going to continue with the fire issues. It's also part of the main thing this time of year is getting into winter wheat seeding, places that are doing winter wheat seeding, and this is going to be a bit of an issue. Certainly in South Dakota, there are people kind of waiting to do winter wheat until they get some precipitation. From a crop insurance standpoint, they don't have much longer to wait to do that. If they're going to do it, they will have to get out. And the southern, as we get further south, there are significant winter wheat areas in the central and the southern plains. They may see a little improvement, but probably not major improvement down there either. So we could have some impact on winter wheat seeding, and for those who seed without precipitation, probably on emergence issues. Next slide, please. We look ahead to October, the 30-day outlook for October, a broad swath of likely above average temperatures continuing into October. And on the right-hand side, the precipitation outlook, more of an impact in just north of the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, more likely to be drier over there. You see a large part of the region is in EC, equal chances. Basically, the author is not feeling comfortable that there are tools or enough information to say better chances for below or above chances for precipitation, so going with EC. But again, even with EC, especially the western areas of the plains and the central plains, the amount of precipitation during an average October will be helpful, but will not give us major improvement in our drought conditions. Next slide, please. 3-month outlook for October to December. You see a similar pattern with temperatures, likely warmer than average. This begins to transition into El Nino conditions here. As I mentioned, El Nino probably going to be a little, fairly relatively weak. The Climate Prediction Center is still hanging on that idea of likely warmer than average conditions as we head through late fall and into the first part of winter. Probability, yes. I pointed out probabilities are lower, not feeling as strong about the warmer than average conditions. There is a part of the forecast too of not wanting to flip-flop from one month to the next, so trying to be somewhat consistent. So they have weakened the probabilities, but still staying with that idea of likely warmer than average. On the right-hand side, precipitation, you see even less confidence in outlooks for precipitation, so saying EC generally across the region. You see the green area in the Gulf Coast still hanging their hat on El Nino conditions down there, leading to wetter than average, more likely wetter than average conditions with a subtropical jet down there. One more slide as we start to look maybe ahead of what's going to be happening in the way of winter. The temperatures for December through February, a similar pattern, noting there as likelihood or a smaller probability of above average temperatures for December through February. Not quite as strong as in previous months, but still hanging with that. Again, El Nino derived on the right-hand side, the precipitation probabilities. You see drier indicated for the Northwest and the Ohio Valley. Again, very much El Nino-like conditions, not terribly strong outlooks, but indicating that way. Again, a good portion of the central region going EC, equal chances. Because with the weak El Nino doesn't have a very strong, precipitation signal over much of the central region except for areas of the Ohio Valley. And with the weaker El Nino, other impacts will come into play that are much less forecastable as we go along. People starting to ask questions also about next summer. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of indications of what's happening next summer. The biggest issue right now is when I talk with people, it's what happens with soil moisture. If we can recover some on soil moisture across the region, we feel a little better, and we think there's a reduced risk of some of the drought issues next year just because of soil moisture supporting some of that crop growth. We're likely not going to see that the way it looks right now over large chunks of the central region. We indicated those areas of the eastern Corn Belt and some of the southern Corn Belt having recovered soil moisture somewhat. Areas of the plains and northern areas are drying out, and we're not seeing a good pattern change like we'd like to see, giving us better chances for improved soil moisture conditions. So on to the next slide. Seasonal drought outlook, again, also released this morning. A bit of a change from last month, where there was an area indicated with some likely improvement, and that was basically indicating climatology, thinking we would get some rainfall during the fall. We have now shifted likely to persistence over most of the central to western U.S. and large areas of development, likely, where we are not in this. Basically, persistence saying conditions are going to stay much the same. And I would agree with it to a certain extent, and that we're not going to be able to alleviate a large part of the drought conditions over the plains area. If we could get 1 to 2 decent systems, we would probably reduce the drought level somewhat, but at this point, we're not seeing that. Eastern part of the region indicating some drought ongoing, but some improvement. Probably more likely to get some systems moving from the southern Mississippi area, accessing some precipitation, and improving conditions somewhat there. Okay, next slide. Again, of a recap of conditions. Eastern areas have shown some improvement, holding steady or worsening in the west and north, where the late season dryness has really kicked in. Outlooks, near term, not a lot of change going on. El Nino is still on track, although it's going to be relatively weak and have a lesser impact. It still is, its signal is showing up in the outlooks. And drought conditions are going to likely persist simply because of severity across the region. Even with some precipitation, that's still going to be with us through a large area going on into next year. Okay. Yes, we will have some better ideas next month. We'll get a little better look on wintertime precipitation and see if we will have gotten any kind of a pattern change that could improve it next month. But we'll give you an update on conditions next month. Next slide. Again, just to recognize our partners and some of the places you can go to access further information and places where this data is taken from. NOAA NCDC, Climate Prediction Center, NOAA's Climate Portal, the U.S. Drought Portal, State Climatologists, Regional Climate Centers. So, okay. I think at this point, John, we can go ahead and go to go back to the connection. Okay. Go back to the back one page. Okay, John, why don't you go back one slide there and leave it up for people who want to get access to this. That's the end of the prepared remarks here. Again, we always welcome feedback from people and comments on what they like, what they don't like, things that we're missing that they would like to know more about. We will certainly try to incorporate those into future webinars. Once again, our next one will be on October 20th on that Thursday, the third Thursday of the month, following the release of the outlooks at 1 p.m. So we'll take any questions now.
At this time, I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question over the phone, press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And we'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. And our first question comes from the line of Paul Lepisto. Your line is open.
Thanks, Dennis. Just a question. Have you guys been able to develop, or could you develop, given what you know on the lack of soil moisture and the lack of precip that the region has been experiencing this year, could you put together a graphic on what it would take in the amount of precip to get areas of the region back up to normal levels of soil moisture?
There are, NCDC has a graphic that gives a number on what it would take to get out of drought. We can, someone here is going to be trying to pull that up. It is a bit of a question mark because it's not a single number. It's not a single number you can give. Obviously, it's greatly impacted by the rate of precipitation, when it happens, how frequently, that sort of thing. I was talking with someone from Kansas City here about the 5 inches of rain they had in Kansas City, and said it came in a fairly steady rate. And they said, how much runoff was there? And they said, really not much runoff because of it. A lot of our soils will take it up very quickly, much more quickly than usually, but 5 or 6 inches over a rain period would probably not do us as well as 2 or 3 events of 2 and 3 inches. Here is one of those graphics John's pulling up right now. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
This is indicated. Yeah, excellent job. This is additional precip needed to bring the Palmer Drought Index to a -0.5, or what we would consider out of drought conditions. So it's indicating, the red areas in Nebraska over to Illinois are 9 to 12 inches. The purple areas are 12 to 15 inches.
And how much time is that, though? To end it in the next 3 months, John, or is that for how long?
It doesn't say.
Yeah, I've been trying to track that down, and have problems finding that exactly. So it seems like it would be whatever it takes to bring the drought index back up again. So yeah, the long term. So that would be whatever. I can't remember what how many months that is. I don't know if it's 3 months or 6 months.
Oh, if you want to look at it on just a case-by-case basis, if you think of a soil profile as being about 5 foot in depth, which is probably pretty good for southeastern South Dakota, northwest Iowa, most of the soil of moisture is gone in that soil right now. So it could probably handle about 8 to 10 inches of liquid for that profile to be full. And if you think of rainfall, not all rainfall usually gets in the profile. You'd have to get at least 10 inches to refill that profile by next year. So, the probability of getting that much precipitation, even a smaller chunk of that, is fairly small at this point. So that kind of gives you some numbers to deal with of how likely it would be for us to even, make it a significant dent in this going into next year.
Thanks for putting that up, John. That's exactly the type of graphic I was looking for, and I know that the timetable would be tough to determine as far as when it would have to happen, but at least it gives people a visual of how critically short many of these areas are. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Again, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, that's star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And there are no further questions at this time. I turn the call back over to the presenters.
Just one other thing that I had forgotten to mention as we went along, we mentioned the slides and webinar and recording of this will be placed up as soon as possible. It'll be within the next 1 to 2 days before we get it put in place. So if you want to refer back to it over time or pass it on to other people, that would be certainly welcomed, and invite people to do that.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dennis. We sure appreciate your time and effort for today's briefing. Anyway, well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And as we mentioned, we will have those recordings and the PowerPoint and a PDF available for you in short order. Thank you, and have a good day.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect. And all presenter lines are now back in the speaker subconference.
So, John, what was the number of attendees at its maximum, more or less?
Hang on a second. Let me. I'll have to go look real quick here.
One thing didn't make sense, and is the drought outlook said some improvement over areas of probability of higher risk of less precipitation. Did you notice that?
But it's a climatology.
I know.
It's a climatology.
But it doesn't make a lot of sense,
yeah.
Right? Yeah, they may get 10 inches, and that may be less than normal over that three months.
But some of what I've always kind of attributed that to as well is they show improvement where, like in North Dakota recently, they showed us with some slight improvement. We attributed it to lower temperatures as well. So your impacts start mitigating. Like we haven't had quite